As Keir Starmer moves steadily closer to Downing Street, internal tensions are beginning to rise. No surprise there. But Labour needs a single song to sing. So this week I've been looking at something that's important but quite subtle. A really crucial tension developing inside Keir Starmer's office. But I want to start by saying what this is not about. This is not about the return of the tension between Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, nor is it really a traditional left-right ideological tension, because in this story there are very few people that any of us would regard as left-wingers. So what is this about? Some of the brightest and most ambitious people in that rather incestuous, self-important world of the London think tanks are all buzzing around the office of the man that everyone expects to be the next Prime Minister. And inevitably, they don't all agree. There are lots and lots of different and important think tanks, including Nesta, including the Resolution Foundation, the UCL Lab, and many, many more. But for Labour MPs, the absolutely crucial distinction, the tension, if you like, is between the Tony Blair Institute on the one hand and Labour Together on the other. And that's what I really want to focus on today. Now, you might ask yourself, why does any of this matter at all? Keir Starmer is cruising to an obvious general election victory. But partly because of tensions and overlaps and problems inside the operation, balls have been dropped and mistakes have been made already. So Keir himself was absolutely livid about the Horlicks over the Rochdale by-election candidacy.
I regret that we had to withdraw our candidate and apologise to voters in Rochdale.
That was clearly a mistake. And also, I think the £28 billion green renewal reversal was not adroitly or well handled. And there may be more such mistakes to come. So this does really matter. Now, there is another emerging problem inside the operation, I think, which is around who does what. Sue Gray, the former civil servant, is emerging as absolutely pivotal, and she's been working on a plan to transform the centre of government so that it's much more disciplined and much more unitary control, if you like. Starmer, Pat McFadden, a few other people, Rachel Reeves, right at the centre of government, directing things. There are 5 missions, everything directed from the centre. And in a sense, she is trying to devise a new government centre that is the polar opposite of the culture of Boris Johnson's Downing Street, the Partygate Downing Street, on which, of course, Sue Gray herself reported. So she's a very, very powerful figure. And, you know, up to now, there has been a pretty clear division between Sue Gray looks after life after winning an election. Morgan McSweeney and his team look at how to win the election. People like Pat McFadden thinking very much about how to win the election. The trouble is, that is not a division which ultimately can be sustained because, of course, everything you do in power has been foregrounded. In your manifesto, you've gone to the country saying, this is the kind of government we want to be, these are the kind of things we want to do. And you can't come into government and then completely change your mind to do something entirely different. Not in a world where people are already so suspicious, so sceptical about politicians. One person said to me, close to Starmer, said to me, the worst thing that we could do is win an election on one set of ideas and principles and then govern completely differently. People already distrust politics and politicians. That would be near fatal. And so there has to be a bit of bleed over between those looking at the manifesto and the message on the doorsteps now and how to win the election, and those currently led by Sue Gray thinking about the future of government after the election. And that is another tension that's inside the system at the moment. So we have an underlying confusion, I think, between what is appropriate for government, what is the future if the Labour wins the election, and how is Labour going to get there? And that is not completely resolved at this point. But beyond that, there's this great hubbub of advice from the different policy groups. And the bit of it that Labour MPs are focusing on most, I think, is the difference between two organisations. One is the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, and the other is Labour Together. Now, there may not be an obvious yawning ideological gap between the two organisations, but they are very distinct. On the one hand, you have Labour Together, sitting in Millbank Tower, the same rather terrible 1970s office block where in 1996, 1997, Tony Blair and Gordon Brown plotted and won the general election, which was going to launch New Labour, the core of New Labour, but also a place where successive generations of Labour Party people have plotted for a long time. It is, as it were, traditional core Labour, the building itself. Labour Together was founded right back during the Corbyn years as a kind of safe haven for non-Corbynite or more moderate or mainstream Labour MPs, people like Lisa Nandy and Rachel Reeves, Steve Reed and many, many more. And then it became the kind of battle tank for the Starmer leadership campaign. But after he won, it has kind of morphed into a think tank, a really important think tank, and it's grown from about 3 or 4 or 5 staffers to about 50 now. And they're really, really important inside the Starmer operation. In many senses, they are the soul of Starmer's Labour Party. And on the other hand, as you were knocking angrily on the door, it's the Tony Blair Institute, and they occupy an anonymous but very swish, very grand, quiet building up near the BBC in North London. And going there is a bit like entering a kind of embassy or an HQ of some mythical country that doesn't actually exist, but which is very much focused on technology and is wealthy and self-confident. Everybody there is beautiful, everybody there is young, everybody there is well-dressed.
The biggest challenge for countries is for their governments to take the right decisions on policy and then to implement those decisions.
We advise on strategy, policy, and delivery. And critically, we see technology as the key enabler across all 3 of those areas of advice.
And its staff, depending on who you talk to, ranges from 900 to about 1,000 people around the world. It has an absolutely massive budget and it recruits some pretty top-draw people. It's got Sir Nick Carter, the former Chief of the Defence Staff there, as a recent recruit. It's got Sir Patrick Vallance, the former Government Chief Scientist, very, very prominent during the COVID outbreak there as well. It's got the former Prime Minister of Finland and many, many more. It's a really, really powerful global organisation, very much fixated on technology and the ability of the big American tech companies to transform, reform public services around the world. There are Labour MPs on the centre-left who rather fear that Starmer is being abducted by the TBI, by Tony Blair and his people, as if some kind of alien operation. This has been grabbed and taken away to a quiet, private place where all his own instincts about class politics and a slightly gritty approach and his pro-statism will be slowly drawn out of him and anaesthetised, and he will be returned to the position as a kind of neo-Blairite. I think this is nonsense. I think both he and Tony Blair are well aware of their relationship. Tony Blair has said himself, talking to Tom Baldwin, Starmer's biographer, that he understands that Starmer comes to the left of him in the party, but is talking to him because he needs advice on the transition to government. And the more he's thinking about government, the more he's thinking about that and the technology that the Tony Blair Institute has expertise in, but the British Civil Service does not. So there is a perfectly reasonable transaction being done there. And if you're Keir Starmer, and somebody has lots of really good experts who've trained up in stuff that you need to know about, and you're being offered them into your office for free, you'd be mad not to take them. Nevertheless, there is a tension there, and I've been trying to look at where this might break out. And I think there are several areas, but mostly around the crucial areas of public service reform. If you look, for instance, at education, where, as with everywhere else, Labour has very, very big ambitions and no money to spend at all, then the Blair Institute view would be, I think, that enhanced AI learning systems are absolutely crucial to raising the standards in schools, particularly in England, that you can get an entire grade above where you would otherwise be. If, as a kid, you get your lesson from your, physics teacher, and then after 20 minutes of listening to your physics teacher and talking to your physics teacher, you are sat down in front of a screen and you're given a multiple choice series of questions about what the subject of the day is. And the AI doesn't only look at your answers and work out what you're getting wrong, but looks at where your cursor is hovering, looks at where you hesitate, and works out which bit of algebra perhaps you don't understand at this point, what you need to know to get to the next level, and then it gives you an individual personalised tuition session in that particular thing. And this is going to be an enormous breakthrough in education around the world. But the Labour Together people are much more sceptical about whether this is actually available yet. And they fear there are lots of heavy pressure, high selling companies determined to make big profits, pushing far too fast. They think AI is going to be really useful in the short term in taking pressure off hard-pressed teachers, in working out who is bunking off school and why, lots of sort of techie things, but not necessarily as a replacement for teachers. So there's a tension there, but that adds nothing to the tension in the NHS and the NHS reform. And in that story, the massive figure of an American tech giant called Palantir looms over absolutely everything. Now, Palantir was formed by Peter Thiel, who's been profiled in the New Statesman, is a right-wing American tech billionaire who back in the day supported Donald Trump and who has said on public platforms in the UK that he thinks the NHS makes people sick and that he thinks the NHS should be privatised.
The thing that seems very odd for an outside observer of Britain is this sort of Stockholm syndrome people have with respect to the NHS, where it's like they think it is the most wonderful thing in the world, and perhaps the first step is to just understand it as a very iatrogenic institution. There's sort of probably some formula where we can go through all the institutions in our society and think of them as more iatrogenic than healthy. The highways create traffic jams and welfare creates poverty and the schools make people dumb and the NHS makes people sick.
Nevertheless, his company, Palantir, has won a really important tech contract for a platform for the NHS data. Now, NHS data is the kind of North Sea oil scale resource for the next century. It is the world's biggest semi-anonymized data on health and population trends, and mining it properly could give you all sorts of information on genomics and health trends, which would allow pharmaceutical companies and others to transform our health prospects. So this is worth an awful lot. How much, you ask? How much is it worth? Well, 5 years ago, the accountants Ernst & Young looked at the 55 million NHS personal records and what they described as a treasure trove of other medical information around it and estimated it was worth around £10 billion a year. It's worth a lot more now. This is a very, very important resource, and the company which gets hold of that and is able to exploit it, to mine it, will make an absolutely astronomical amount of money. So will that company be Palantir? They have got the first contract for the platform for some of these databases. They haven't got the main thing yet, but there is going to be one heck of a battle when they go for it. Is Palantir, owned by somebody who wants to privatise the NHS, really the company that should take over the NHS database? I foresee a massive argument coming there, and I have the instinct that there will be people on the Tony Blair Institute side who say, yes, these are the world leaders, these are the people we have to deal with, these are the people who will give us so much money that we'll be able to properly keep the NHS going, we'll be able to raise salaries, we'll be able to raise standards, we'll use all sorts of new tech. This is the future of the NHS on the one hand, and people more on the old Labour Together side, who I often regard as kind of old Labour right-wingers who say, no, that is letting the private sector get much too far into the NHS, much too far into the state. I do think there is a kind of division between, as it were, statists and, as it were, market hardliners. Between these two bodies, which is going to become more and more prominent and will be a big part of the story of the next Labour government if we get there. So what are the other tensions inside the office that you can see building up? On an entirely different story, I think Rwanda is one. We're currently going through what people call ping-pong between the House of Lords and the House of Commons. The Commons sent the Rwanda bill to the Lords, and a series of really, really important amendments slashing into the bill on human rights and legal grounds have been inserted by the House of Lords. That will then be reversed by the House of Commons with the Tory majority, sent back to the House of Lords. And at the end of this whole process, which goes on for some time, the Labour peers have been instructed by the Leader's office to let the bill go through, not to try to stop it at the last minute with Tory rebels. And some of them are absolutely furious about this. They see this as a constitutional and legal outrage, this legislation.
I do believe that noble lords are entitled to be a little more muscular than usual in relation to matters such as this that were, my lords, not in anyone's manifesto, that risk being contrary to the domestic rule of law, that risk breaching human rights that have been baked in to the hard-won and precious Good Friday Agreement, and all this in what may or may not be the last days of a government.
And just because those around Keir Starmer think it would be harder to fight the election having actually stopped the Rwanda legislation, they think they still have a moral duty to do that. There's a lot of tension there. I can see that coming.
Say it loud and say it clear. Refugees are welcome here.
Now, another obvious area of tension is the whole trade union reform and workers' rights agenda.
Day one basic rights. A ban on 0-hour contracts. An end to fire and rehire. And we'll bring in a proper living wage that people can actually live on.
A very, very ambitious programme designed to be put into law very quickly by a new Labour government and spearheaded by Angela Rayner, who's not only the deputy leader of the party, of course, but was independently elected. And one person close to her and that agenda has said they think the Tony Blair Institute has been going through this with a fine-tooth comb, line by line. And we know that a lot of big business doesn't like this agenda, doesn't like what it's saying on the gig economy and workers' rights. So I can see quite an argument there. Now, when I talked to Team Angela Rayner about this, they were pretty confident. They say this is an agenda, this workers' rights agenda, very, very popular among Labour voters, very, very popular inside the trade unions. Getting rid of it would be a big, big mistake. Keir Starmer understands that. But I'm just not quite so sure. I think there will be pushback against it. And Angela Rayner, because of problems that she's had about tax and council taxes and property and so forth, is being ferociously attacked at the moment by the Conservative Party.
So today I'm going to reduce the higher rate of property capital gains tax from 28% to 24%. That really is for you, Angela.
They have a really underhand operation online, social media and the rest of it to try to bring her down. So I think Angela Rayner might find herself before the election fighting on two fronts there. Now, there are many, many other examples where I think there will be tensions ahead. I think policy over Europe and trying to get closer to the single market without joining the single market will be a source of tension among all of those buzzing researchers and clever people inside Starmer's office. And I think at the end of it, it's very, very good that Starmer has so many really clever, good people around him. It's really good that people trying to think their way into becoming a new government have so many sources of information, so many sources of thought. That is wonderful. And a lot of it's coming to them for free, which is, again, very, very important because they haven't got that much money. But when you add all the people I've been talking about, all the other institutes, and when you add all the people coming from the city and the big economic outfits to advise Rachel Reeves on the economic stuff, there is such a hubbub, such a buzz. It's beginning to become a bit like a cacophony. What the Labour Party needs in the end, by the time of the election, is a single song to sing. And if you talk to Labour candidates who've been going around the country, going around their own constituencies, they're not there yet. Thank you for watching. I would really love to know what you think. So please, if you can, leave a comment below. And don't forget to subscribe so that you can get videos from the New Statesman as soon as they're released.